Wool, cotton, and linen. These are the building blocks of clothing. But where does fashion draw its line in the mind's perception of clothing, in the mind's perception of beauty? Let's examine fashion through the scores of time and culture to determine what makes clothing fashion, and where does conformity have a role to play in all this. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Western fashion was influenced by the height of the Renaissance, the rebirth of attire, but yet still retaining modest rules for decency. Showing off your wealth was a priority to gain people's respect and admiration. Ruffs back in the day were a sign of nobility and wealth. Ruffs as worn by Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth I. The ruff is made from a piece of linen and worn around the neck. Before it is worn around the neck, it is stiffened with starch and is provided with many colors and sizes for the wearer. Ruffs were worn all across Western Europe. Today we would see this fashion trend as out of the normal. Though the ruff's day of streetwear are over, the ruff is still being worn today by bishops of the Church of Denmark, Greenland, and the Church of the Faroe Islands. The ruff is mostly obscure in today's world, except for when it comes to fashion designers who are inspired by the Shakespearean era attire, and they were so inspired by it that they decided to put it into their works as a tribute to the past wearers of the ruff. As ruffs were very popular in Western European fashion, they were also very uncomfortable, which made the wearer's neck posture straight up and stiff, which the posture itself is signaling to everyone else that you are a person with great fashion taste. The uncomfort and lack of movement led to the fashion piece's downfall, and by the early 1700s, ruffs were seen as out of fashion. As old fashion trends go out of popularity, some last the centuries of time and are perceived by both men and women as trendy. An example of a fashion piece in this matter would be the high heel. The high heel as we know them today is first known to originate in the 9th century Iran. Aged depictions show us them being put to use by men on horseback, an essential garment for stability while firing arrows from horseback. After they became renowned for their looks, men and women wore the heel. From Persia, high heels spread across the Old World. When this fashion piece reached Western Europe, it took the rich royals and people of lower class both by storm. This fashion trend reached its peak in the 18th century, pairing with other fashion attires of the time, and we begin to see some similarities of our modern fashion and that of the past. The 1700s would be a big step in self-expressionism when it comes to Western fashion. People are wearing bright, extravagant colors to draw attention to themselves as fashion conscious. The heel was seen as a men's fashion, worn in Europe because when combined with breeches that exposed the calves, the heel would flex the gastrocnemius muscle, giving a strong look to the calves, which the ladies found at the time very attractive. Commonly, breeches were matched with waistcoats or vests of a colorful spectrum and elaborate designs, as well as tailcoats of the same color. Full-length pants, as we know them today, existed at the time, but they were seen as a low-class piece of clothing, usually reserved for sailors, but as a distinction, though, between regular sailor and the captain of a ship, for the role of a captain would require the wear of breeches. This is because a captain is a role of importance, and the need to stand out among the men is priority. High heels were a sign of nobility because heels worn by the bourgeois in France were decorated with shiny buckles, or an alteration in height and elevation. Women decided to wear the heel mostly for the same reasons men did, and there was always a distinction between men and women's fashion, with men wearing tunics and some variation of a trouser, and women wearing dresses, so there was a need to differentiate the heels between the sexes. The men's heel became stouter, low-cut, and sturdy, while the women's heel remained much as it was before, although women in France still did wear low-cut heels on account of they were not trying to associate with rich royals. This way of telling apart shoes still remain to the 20th and 21st centuries. Mostly women are associated with the heel today, yet men occasionally can be seen wearing the heel, and high heels could be spotted on a man today because of everyone's new perception of speaking the body's soul and understanding of different perspectives and individuals. Fashion is influenced by perspectives, movements, and conflicts in the world. As the 1790s rolled on into its final years, breeches, which were popularly matched with heels by men, phased out of fashion, and in the 1820s, pants became the talk of the town. With photography being invented in the next decade later, the early wearers of the trouser can still be seen. Still distinguished as menswear, pants became taboo for women, and they continued to wear dresses. But as women became independent, as known as excellent horse riders, they ditched the dresses and wore pants in need of less confinement while riding. Masculinity became influenced into women's fashion in the early 1900s. It was no longer a big deal for women to wear pants. By the 1960s, fashion boundaries that went unspoken of were broken. Lack of needing to conform to what men and women needed to meet their requirements in beauty and fashion was now met with creative individualism. The lines of conformity and expression were blurred. Dresses were no longer the standard norm for women, and men with short hair could grow it out past their ears. Fashion changes throughout history, and what was a sign of wealth back in the day now looks strange to us, but our fashion of today is heavily influenced by individuality and self-expression that was continued from the 60s. People still conform in clothing and fashion, but our culture and very recent generations express themselves by wearing what makes them feel good about themselves. Fashion varies today from person to person because of different perspectives of people. I hope this video taught you a little bit about some of the fashion trends that are being kept up through history. We look at fashion through history and see repetitions. We start wearing something, exclude it, then pick it back up again. Also, the importance is of recognizing how far fashion has come for men and women.